This is Bloomberg Surveillance, early edition. I'm Francine Lackman, London. Kaylee Lines in New York. Met with her off today. Maybe you can handle Bitcoin, tumbling by so much. Now let's get straight to the Bloomberg First Word News and southeastern states suffering the most from gasoline shortages will start to get relief this weekend. The nation's largest fuel pipeline has resumed operations after that cyber attack. Well, fuel started flowing yesterday afternoon, but a fleet of tanker trucks is needed to transport it from gasoline terminals to retail stations. And President Biden spoke to Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu about the most violent clashes between Israel and the Palestinians in years. Well, the president said Israel has a right to defend itself against the rocket attacks the militant group Hamas has been firing the rockets from the Gaza Strip. Israel has responded with air raids. The CDC has opened up a new phase in the U.S. immunization effort, while an agency advisory committee says that children 12 to 15 can safely take the coronavirus vaccine made by Pfizer and BioNTech. Well, the FDA cleared the vaccine's use on adolescents earlier this week. And he succeeded the legendary bond investor Bill Gross, and now Nick Maroutsas plans to just walk away from the job at age 44. Maroutsas will leave the position as head of global bonds at Janus Henderson in October. One thing's on the schedule, that's taking cross-country trips with his young children while, as he put it, they still like me. Maroutsas tells Bloomberg that in a year, they'll probably resurface in some capacity. I love that, Kaylee. It's like, you're retiring in the finance world, but actually, usually you end up somewhere else.
Yeah, well, this one's interesting to me, Francine. I've had the pleasure of talking to Nick Maroutsas several times on Bloomberg Television. He truly is one of the best, but it speaks to this idea, as finance firms specifically are really mandating people come back into the office at least part of the time when other companies aren't. Anecdotally, I have a friend who lived in a van for 4 months during the pandemic because she could work from her van, and her company would potentially let her do that forever. And if you have a job that requires you coming into the office and you can't do that, maybe you think, well, maybe I just won't work here anymore.
Yeah, I mean, that could be one of the reasons. I imagine if you're in charge, you also set the rules, so it's something that, it's just a life decision, I guess. After the pandemic, you say, actually, what kind of life do I want, and what kind of relationship, in certain cases, do you also want with your kids? Now, coming up, the chief executive of Standard Bank, Africa's largest lender, on the post-pandemic future. This is Bloomberg. Surveillance Early Edition. I'm Francine Lachman, London. Kaylee Lyons in New York. Matt Miller off today. Now, it's all about inflation. I know we have a lot of stories, Kaylee, that you and I both love talking about, which is, of course, the pipeline trade to figure out what happens there, Bitcoin, but really underpinning these markets. Inflation, and certainly in Europe, they were significantly lower, I would say, in the last hour and 10 minutes.
Yeah, inflation fears really rattling markets. Of course, that started yesterday with the upside surprise on CPI. But coming up in about 3 hours from now, we get the PPI print. And so markets are really just awaiting that data, Francine. As you said, the European session really at this point is quite ugly. We are off session lows, but still we're down about 1.3% on the stock 600. Here in the U.S., futures again off the lows, but of course we're coming off losses of more than 2% across all the major benchmarks. The NASDAQ 100 fell 2.6% in the Wednesday session. Today, futures down about 19 points. The 10-year Treasury yield right now unchanged from yesterday's on the back of that CPI data. We're just around 1.7%. And then, of course, there is one asset I want to check on that you can't use to buy a Tesla. Elon Musk has changed his mind, no longer accepting Bitcoin as a payment for those electric cars. He's concerned about the environmental impact of mining, that taking the crypto coin down 8%. We are now sub $50,000. And of course, with losses in Bitcoin, you can expect that a lot of crypto-tied stocks are under some pressure in pre-market trading, and that is indeed true. We're looking at losses of now about 13% in early hours for the likes of Marathon Digital and Riot Blockchain. Coinbase, of course, the cryptocurrency exchange, it's lower by about 4%. And even Square, Jack Dorsey's payments company that is indeed tied to crypto, is lower by about 1.3% before the bell, Francine.
Kaylee, that's the one thing that, of course, we need to keep an eye on. Now turning on to Africa's largest lender, so let's talk banking. Standard Bank is laying the groundwork for the post-pandemic era. The bank is making plans to bulk up its businesses and accelerate its digital transformation. Now, with operations across 20 African countries, Standard Bank has been shielding from some of the economic pain faced in its home market of South Africa. Well, joining us now from Johannesburg is Sim Chabalala. He's the chief executive of Standard Bank. So thank you so much for joining us this morning. How worried are you about waves of COVID with new variants that could actually impact your growth forecasts?
Good morning. Yeah, of course. South African GDP growth is built to roughly 2.2%. That's according to the National Treasury. Our own economists expect it to be roughly 4.6%, actually, of a decline of 7% last year. That decline of 7%, as you correctly allude to, was exclusively as a consequence of COVID and the response by the South African authorities to the pandemic. A 1-in-100-year event, a hard lockdown, which had a material negative impact on GDP growth. You correctly allude also to the fact that we are facing a third wave. We don't think that we will repeat the mistakes that were made last year. I think we've all learned by doing. The protocols that are in place, the health system processes, social distancing, the discipline of South Africans, and then the increased availability of vaccines, we believe will give rise to a more muted effect, much different to the first wave of last year.
So if there's a third wave, if there is a third wave, and it's, of course we always think about the loss of life and all of the horrible things that people have to go through because of that, but what does it actually mean for your revenue? So what kind of, where does it hurt the most for Standard Bank?
I think, again, depending on the nature of the lockdown and the response to the third wave, if it's as hard as the first wave of last year, what you then see is a slowdown in activity in the hospitality industry, a slowdown in activity by aircraft and airlines, but then an increase in activity by people involved in electronic channels. It definitely puts a pressure on our top line if that happens, and then it also increases our bad debts.